At 3:17 in the morning, two police officers stood in our living room and told us that my older brother was dead. They said Adrian had been shot several times outside a graduation party. Paramedics had found him in an alley at 11:56 p.m. He had no pulse when they arrived, and the medical examiner officially pronounced him dead 12 minutes after midnight. I stared at the officers, waiting for one of them to admit they had made a mistake. They had to be wrong. At 12:23 a.m., Adrian had called me and asked me to pick him up. I had driven through the police barricades, found him stumbling beneath a broken streetlight, and brought him home in my car. My parents had seen him too. My father had shouted at him for getting blood on the floor. My mother had tried to examine his wounds, but Adrian pushed her hands away. Before walking into his bedroom, he turned toward us and said something I would never forget. "If I call again tonight, don't answer." Now the police were telling us he had been dead before I ever received that call. My mother ran down the hallway and threw open his bedroom door. The room was empty. The window was locked from the inside. His bed had not been touched. There were no bloody footprints, no stained clothes, and no sign that anyone had entered. Only Adrian's phone rested in the middle of his pillow. The screen suddenly lit up. An incoming call. My mother looked down at the name and released a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. The call was coming from my number, but my phone was still in my hand. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the kind of place where Adrian and I grew up, and why, long before he died, my brother was already afraid that something was following him. Our neighborhood was a maze of aging apartment buildings, abandoned shops, and narrow alleys where streetlights rarely survived more than a few weeks. Our parents arrived in the United States with almost nothing. They spoke limited English and spent most of their lives harvesting vegetables on farms outside the city. During the busiest seasons, they left before sunrise and returned after dark with dirt beneath their fingernails and pain written across their faces. They worked hard, but hard work did not always mean enough money. Some weeks the refrigerator contained little more than rice, eggs, and a few bruised vegetables that the farm owner allowed them to take home. Our parents never complained. They simply divided everything into smaller portions and claimed they were not hungry. Adrian was the oldest child. I came 18 months after him, followed by our two younger sisters. He began taking care of us before he was old enough to understand what responsibility meant. When other children mocked my accent, Adrian fought them. When I broke a neighbor's window, he accepted the blame. When our father's old truck stopped working, Adrian walked 3 miles through the rain to bring our mother home. To me, he was more than a brother. He was the part of me that knew how to survive. That was why I followed him when he became involved with the Harbor Kings. The gang had existed in our neighborhood for years. Several cousins belonged to it, along with boys we had known since elementary school. At first, they made it sound like a family, people who protected one another when the police, landlords, and employers did not care. Adrian joined at 14. I followed less than a year later. We began with small crimes, delivering sealed packages, stealing electronics from parked cars, and watching street corners for patrol vehicles. Later came drugs, stolen cars, and violent confrontations with rival crews. We told ourselves we were helping our family. The first time we brought home enough money to pay an overdue electricity bill, our mother cried with relief. She never asked where it came from. Perhaps she was afraid of the answer. As we grew older, Adrian became respected throughout the neighborhood. He was calm when everyone else panicked, and he never raised his voice unless someone threatened his family. People greeted him by name. They called me Adrian's little brother. I pretended that did not bother me. The truth was that I did not know who I was without him. Then he met Elena. They had known each other since middle school, but they began dating seriously during his final 2 years of high school. Elena was quiet, pale, and strangely observant. She had long black hair and dark eyes that seemed to notice things other people missed. She did not like the gang. Whenever Adrian returned with bruised knuckles or blood on his shirt, she would stare at him as if she were looking at a clock that only she could see. "You're spending your life too quickly," she once told him. He laughed, but she did not. As Adrian spent more time with Elena, I began to feel abandoned. It embarrassed me to admit it, even to myself. Whenever he cancelled plans because she wanted to see him, anger burned in my chest. Elena understood how I felt. One evening, she found me sitting alone behind our building and lowered herself onto the concrete step beside me. "You think I'm taking him away from you," she said. I denied it. She smiled sadly. "I'm trying to keep him here." At the time, I thought she meant keeping him away from the gang. Now, I believe she meant something else. 2 weeks before Adrian's graduation, I awoke shortly after 2 a.m. and heard voices coming from the basement. Our parents were asleep, and my sisters shared the bedroom across from mine. I assumed Adrian had brought friends home without permission. The basement door was slightly open. A faint red glow moved across the floor below, accompanied by a low whisper that sounded like 2 people repeating the same sentence. I descended quietly. Adrian and Elena were kneeling opposite each other inside a circle of small candles. Between them sat a bowl of dark water, 2 photographs, and a length of red thread. Their right hands were tied together. Blood trickled from matching cuts on their index fingers and fell into the bowl. Elena noticed me first. Her chanting stopped. Every candle went out at the same moment. Adrian stood so quickly that he overturned the bowl. Its contents spread across the concrete, but the liquid did not behave like ordinary water. It flowed toward my bare feet in several narrow streams, as though drawn to my body. Adrian grabbed an old towel and covered it before it could touch me. "What are you doing down here?" he demanded. I asked him the same question. "Nothing," he said. "It was Elena's idea, some promise ritual she read about." Elena remained on the floor. Her face had lost all its color. "You weren't supposed to see this," she whispered. Adrian untied the red thread and pushed past me. As he climbed the stairs, I noticed something burned into the concrete beneath the overturned bowl. 3 circles joined by a single line. There had only been 2 people performing the ritual. "Why are there 3 circles?" I asked. Elena looked toward the staircase to make sure Adrian was gone. Then she seized my wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. "If Adrian calls you after midnight, Listen carefully before you answer. I laughed nervously and asked how I was supposed to listen to someone before answering the phone. She tightened her grip. Let it ring 3 times. If it stops, it's him. And if it keeps ringing? Elena looked down at the dark liquid creeping from beneath the towel. Then whatever is calling only sounds like your brother. The following morning, Adrian dismissed the ritual as meaningless superstition. He made me promise not to tell our parents, and for several days everything returned to normal. But on the night before his graduation party, he entered my room and locked the door behind him. There was a fresh cut across the same finger Elena had used in the ritual. He placed a small brass key in my palm. If something happens to me tomorrow, open the metal box under my bed. I asked what was inside. Adrian looked toward my bedroom window. A human silhouette stood beneath the streetlight across the road. Its features were hidden, but its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as though it were trying to hear us through the glass. Adrian closed the curtains. "Don't open the box unless I'm dead," he whispered. Then my phone began ringing on the desk. The screen displayed Adrian's name. He was standing directly in front of me. Neither of us moved. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. It did not stop. The phone rang a 4th time. Adrian snatched it from the desk and rejected the call. For several seconds we stood in silence, staring at his name in the call history. I asked if it was one of his friends playing a joke. "No one else has my phone," he replied. He pulled his own phone from his pocket and placed it beside mine. The screen was dark. There were no outgoing calls. Across the street, the silhouette beneath the streetlight had disappeared. Adrian took my phone and deleted the missed call. Then he removed the battery, even though I told him that made no sense. "Forget it happened," he said. I asked if the call was connected to the ritual in the basement. His expression changed for a fraction of a second, long enough to tell me that he knew more than he was willing to admit. "Elena and I made a stupid promise," he said. "Nothing more." "What kind of promise?" His eyes drifted toward the locked door. "That neither of us would ever be left alone." Before leaving my room, he repeated Elena's warning. If his name appeared on my phone after midnight, I was to wait for 3 rings. If the call continued, I must not answer. The following evening, nearly 30 people gathered at a small rental house near the edge of our neighborhood to celebrate Adrian's graduation. Music shook the windows, smoke filled the kitchen, and cars lined both sides of the street. For a few hours, Adrian seemed like himself again. He laughed with our friends, accepted drinks he barely touched, and allowed people to take photographs with him. Everyone talked about the future, as if the future had already promised to wait for us. Adrian was supposed to begin working at a repair shop the following Monday. He had told our father that he wanted to leave the Harbor Kings and save enough money to study automotive engineering. I wanted to believe him, but no one simply walked away from the Kings. Shortly after 9, I noticed a dark sedan pass the house for the 3rd time. Its headlights were off, even though the sky had already faded to black. I pointed it out to Adrian. He watched the vehicle disappear around the corner, then told 2 of our friends to lock the back gate. "Rivals?" I asked. "Maybe." But his eyes moved toward Elena. She stood alone beside the kitchen window. In the reflection behind her, someone seemed to be standing outside in the yard. When I looked directly through the glass, no one was there. Elena had barely spoken all evening. She wore a long-sleeved black dress despite the summer heat, and a strip of red cloth was wrapped around her injured finger. At approximately 9:20, she pulled me into the hallway. "You still have the key Adrian gave you?" I told her I did. "If anything happens, destroy what's inside the box." Adrian told me to open it. He doesn't understand what he brought into your house. Before I could demand an explanation, a bottle shattered in the living room. Several men were arguing near the front door, and Adrian stepped between them. The moment passed without violence, but the mood of the party changed. People began checking the street through the blinds. Someone turned the music louder, perhaps to conceal their nervousness. I remembered that I had promised to take our mother to an early medical appointment. At 9:30, I told Adrian I was going home. He hugged me longer than usual. "Stay home tonight," he said. I reminded him that I might need to return if he could not find a ride. "No matter what happens, don't come back here." He tried to smile, but his eyes betrayed him. As I walked toward my car, Elena called my name from the porch. She opened her mouth to say something, then every light inside the house went out. People shouted, someone laughed. A moment later, the power returned. Elena was no longer on the porch. I drove home alone. The house was quiet when I arrived. Our parents and sisters were already asleep. I showered, set an alarm for 6, and placed my phone on the nightstand. Sleep came quickly, but it was filled with broken images. I dreamed that Adrian was standing at the foot of my bed, with his back turned. Water dripped from his clothes, forming a black pool around his feet. Someone was whispering from inside my closet, "Turn him around." I tried to call Adrian's name, but my mouth would not open. The figure slowly began turning its head without moving its shoulders. My phone dragged me out of the dream. The room was dark. The clock read 12:23 a.m. Adrian's name glowed on the screen. I remembered the warning and allowed it to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. The ringing stopped. Relief swept through me. Then the phone immediately rang again. Adrian's name reappeared. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5. I should have ignored it. Instead, I answered. For several seconds, there was only static. Beneath it, I could hear distant music and people screaming. "Adrian?" Something exhaled into the receiver. Then my brother's voice emerged, weak and breathless. "Where are you?" "At home." "What happened?" "You need to pick me up." I sat upright. "Are you hurt?" A wet cough came through the phone. "Something happened at the party." In the background, another voice whispered the same words, half a second after him, perfectly imitating his tone. "Something happened at the party." I asked where he was. "The alley behind Mason Street." The second voice repeated the location. Then Adrian spoke more urgently. "Come alone, and if you see me before I call your name, keep driving." The connection ended. I dressed and left without waking anyone. As I approached Mason Street, red and blue lights flashed against the buildings. Police cars and ambulances blocked the main road. Officers shouted at crowds gathering behind the tape, while paramedics moved between the house and an ambulance. I tried calling Adrian. No answer. I circled the block, searching for another way into the neighborhood. The next alley was narrow and unlit, bordered by garages covered in graffiti. My headlights swept across dumpsters, fences, and piles of broken furniture. Halfway down the alley, I saw someone standing beside a utility pole. He wore the same white shirt Adrian had worn to the party. Dark stains covered his chest and stomach. One sleeve had been torn away,
and blood ran from his fingertips. I stopped several yards from him. The figure lowered its head. I remembered Adrian's warning. If you see me before I call your name, keep driving. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. The man took one step toward the car, then another. His movements were stiff and uneven, as if his joints had forgotten how to work. I shifted into reverse. "Daniel!" It was Adrian's voice. He stumbled into the headlights and shielded his eyes. His face was swollen, and blood covered the left side of his neck. I unlocked the doors. Adrian climbed into the back seat instead of sitting beside me. The car filled with the metallic smell of blood and something else, damp soil, like a grave opened after heavy rain. I asked what had happened. "Drive. Were you shot? Just take me home." His voice was calm, but his teeth chattered violently. I turned the heater on. As we left the alley, I glanced at him in the rear-view mirror. Adrian sat directly behind me, his head resting against the window. His eyes were open, fixed on the darkness outside. I asked where Elena was. She made a mistake. What kind of mistake? She thought the promise would protect us. The radio switched on by itself. A woman's voice whispered through the static. One body was promised. 3 shadows were taken. Adrian leaned forward and struck the radio until it went silent. I nearly drove onto the sidewalk. What was that? Don't listen to it. Blood dripped from his sleeve onto the floor mat. I told him we needed to go to the hospital, but he grabbed my shoulder with startling force. His fingers were so cold that I felt them through my jacket. "If you take me to the hospital, it will know where I am." "What will?" He looked into the mirror. For the first time, our eyes met in the reflection. Adrian's face was gray. His lips had turned blue, and a dark hole was visible beneath his jaw. "Daniel," he whispered, "you answered the second call." A horn blared. I looked forward and swerved away from an approaching truck. When I checked the mirror again, the back seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes. There was no one behind me. Only a wide pool of blood soaked the upholstery. Then Adrian's voice came from directly beside my ear. "Don't stop the car." I turned around. He was sitting in the back seat again, but now he was no longer alone. A second figure sat beside him, hidden under a dripping black veil. Adrian stared straight ahead and whispered, "Whatever you do, don't let it see that you can see it."
I forced myself to face the road. Every instinct told me to stop the car, jump out, and run. But Adrian's reflection remained visible in the mirror, silently begging me not to react. The veiled figure sat beside him without moving. Its head nearly touched the ceiling. Beneath the dripping fabric, I could see the vague outline of a face that appeared too long to be human. Cold water began running across the floor beneath my feet. I kept driving. "Adrian," I said, pretending not to see our passenger. "Who shot you?" He did not answer immediately. The figure slowly turned toward him. "A car came past the house," Adrian finally said. "Someone started shooting." His voice sounded distant, as if he were speaking from the other end of a tunnel. "Did you see who did it?" "It doesn't matter anymore." The veiled thing lifted one hand and placed it on Adrian's shoulder. Its fingers were pale, swollen, and unnaturally long. Adrian flinched. "Elena tried to finish the promise. She thought it would keep me from dying." "What promise?" The figure leaned closer to him. "Stop asking questions," Adrian whispered. I obeyed. When we entered our street,
The thing in the back seat began making a low clicking sound. Every streetlight went dark as our car passed beneath it, then flickered back on behind us. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I could no longer see the figure in the mirror. Adrian remained behind me. "Is it gone?" I asked. "No." "Where is it?" His eyes shifted toward the roof of the car. A heavy impact struck directly above my head. The metal bent inward. I threw open my door and stumbled onto the driveway. Adrian emerged from the rear passenger side, moving slowly as blood dripped from his clothes. The roof of the car was empty. Our porch light switched on. My father opened the front door, squinting into the darkness. When he saw Adrian, his confusion turned to fury. "What happened to you?" Adrian did not respond. My mother appeared behind him. She covered her mouth and ran outside without shoes. She tried to touch the wound on Adrian's neck, but he caught her wrists. "I'm fine, Mum." "You're covered in blood." "It isn't all mine." My father demanded to know whether there had been another gang fight. He accused us of bringing danger to the house and frightening our younger sisters. Adrian stood beneath the porch light, listening without protest. I remember the blood falling from his shirt, but I never heard it strike the concrete. No drops appeared beneath his feet. My mother began crying. Adrian's expression softened. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." My father fell silent. Adrian looked at each of us as though committing our faces to memory. "I love you." Then he turned to me. "Don't open the door if I call again tonight." He walked into the house and disappeared down the hallway. His bedroom door closed. My father turned his anger toward me, demanding an explanation. I told him there had been a shooting at the party and that Adrian refused to go to the hospital. "Then make him go," my father said. I followed Adrian down the hallway. The air grew colder with every step. When I reached his room, I raised my hand to knock. From the other side came the sound of someone dragging a heavy object across the floor. "Adrian?" The sound stopped. A woman began whispering inside the room. Her words were too faint to understand, but Adrian answered her. "You weren't supposed to follow him." The woman laughed. I reached for the doorknob. "Don't come in," Adrian shouted. His voice struck the door with enough force for me to step back. "Go to your room, Daniel. Lock the door and don't answer your phone." I returned to my bedroom and inserted a chair under the handle. I could still hear movement down the hallway, slow footsteps passing from Adrian's room to the kitchen, then returning. At 1:08 a.m., someone scratched at my door. 3 long strokes, then silence. My phone remained on the desk with the battery removed. At 1:19, the screen lit up anyway. No number appeared. The device vibrated across the wooden surface, although it had no power. I covered it with a blanket. The vibration continued for nearly a minute before stopping. I do not remember falling asleep. The violent pounding on our front door woke me shortly after 3. My father was already in the hallway. My mother emerged from her room in a robe, asking who could be visiting at such an hour. 2 uniformed officers waited on the porch. Behind them, another police vehicle stood in the street, with its lights turned off.
The officers asked whether they could speak to my parents. Since my father understood little English, I sat beside him to translate. One officer removed his hat. The other kept looking toward the hallway. They asked us to sit down. Then they told us Adrian was dead. My father shook his head before I had finished translating. "No," he said, "my son is sleeping." The officer glanced at his partner. "I'm sorry, sir. Your son was identified at the scene." "That's impossible," I said. "I brought him home." They asked what time I had seen him. I told them about the phone call, the alley, and the drive back. The officers exchanged another look. One opened a small notebook. "Your brother was found at 11:56 p.m. Paramedics attempted to revive him, but his injuries were fatal. He was pronounced dead shortly after midnight." My mother stood so abruptly that her chair fell backward. She ran toward Adrian's room. I followed her, with my father and the officers close behind. The door was closed. My mother knocked. "Adrian." No answer. She opened it. The bedroom was empty. The bedspread was perfectly smooth. The window was locked. There were no bloodstains on the carpet and no wet footprints near the door. The metal box beneath Adrian's bed had been pulled halfway into view. On the pillow rested his phone. My mother approached it with trembling hands. The screen illuminated before she touched it. My name appeared above an incoming call. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was still missing its battery. The dead phone in my hand began vibrating. Both devices rang at the same time. The officer nearest the door stepped backward. "Don't answer," I said. My mother stared at Adrian's phone as tears streamed down her face. The first ring ended, then the second, then the third. The ringing stopped. A voicemail notification appeared. The officer asked us not to touch anything, but my mother pressed the message before he could stop her. At first, we heard only the sound of a car engine. Then my own voice came through the speaker. "Adrian, who shot you?" My blood turned cold. It was a recording of the conversation from my drive home. Adrian's voice responded, "It doesn't matter anymore." But this time the recording contained something I had not heard in the car. A woman whispered beneath his words, "He is the door." The message ended with a loud impact and my brother screaming my name. One of the officers took the phone. He asked whether anyone else had been in my car. I said no. It was a lie, but I could not explain the veiled figure without sounding insane. The police searched the house. They found no trace of Adrian and no evidence that an injured person had entered. At dawn, they inspected my car. The back seat was soaked in blood. Samples were collected and later confirmed to belong to Adrian. Yet the security camera above our neighbor's garage showed me arriving alone. In the footage, I opened the rear door and stood aside as if allowing someone to exit. Then I walked toward the house beside an empty patch of air. My parents appeared on the porch. They seemed to be speaking to no one. As Adrian supposedly entered the house, the camera distorted. For 4 seconds, every figure in the recording vanished except me. I remained in the driveway, staring upward. Something enormous was crouched on the roof of my car. The image cleared before anyone could identify it. The officers assumed the recording was corrupted. They had no explanation for the blood or the phone in Adrian's bedroom. But grief creates confusion, and they eventually decided that my family's memories were irrelevant. After they left, I remembered the brass key. I entered Adrian's room and pulled the metal box from beneath his bed. Inside were photographs of Adrian and Elena, a bundle of red thread, several newspaper clippings, and a handwritten notebook. The first page contained a single sentence: "If I die before the promise is broken, it will use my voice to enter our home." A folded piece of paper fell from the notebook.
It was a list of 3 names. Adrian's name had been crossed out in red ink. Elena's name appeared beneath it. The 3rd name was mine. As I stared at the page, Adrian's phone rang behind me. This time, the caller was Elena. I answered immediately. She was sobbing so hard that I could barely understand her. "Daniel, listen to me," she whispered. "The person you brought home last night wasn't your brother." The bedroom door slammed shut. From inside the closet, Adrian's voice answered her. "I know."
I dropped the phone. The closet door stood less than 6 feet away. Its wooden panels trembled as though someone were breathing against them from the other side. "Daniel!" Elena's voice came from the floor. "What happened?" I could not answer. The closet handle slowly turned. I grabbed Adrian's notebook and backed toward the bedroom door. It refused to open. I pulled harder, but something seemed to be holding it shut from the hallway. The closet opened by an inch. Dark water seeped through the gap. It flowed across the carpet in several narrow streams, exactly like the liquid I had seen during the ritual in our basement. Adrian whispered my name from inside. His voice sounded frightened. "Please, let me out." I knew it was not him. Still, hearing my brother beg from inside that darkness nearly broke me. "Daniel, don't listen," Elena shouted through the phone. The closet door opened another inch. A blue, bloodless hand curled around its edge. I forced the brass key into the bedroom lock, although it was not made for that door. The moment the key turned, the lights exploded. The room plunged into darkness. Something rushed out of the closet. I felt wet fabric brush across my face as the bedroom door flew open behind me. I ran into the hallway without looking back. My mother stood at the far end, staring past me. Her lips moved in a silent prayer. I turned. The room was empty again. There was no water on the carpet and no hand gripping the closet door. Only Adrian's white graduation shirt hung inside, gently swinging from side to side. I retrieved the phone. Elena told me to meet her at an abandoned church 3 blocks from the river. She refused to come to our house. Before ending the call, she asked one question. "Did it cross your doorway?" I remembered Adrian walking inside as my parents watched. "Yes." Elena stopped crying. "Then the promise has already begun." The church had been closed for years after a fire damaged its roof. Rain entered through broken windows, and weeds grew between the floorboards. Elena waited near the ruined altar, surrounded by candles. She looked different from the night before. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. Several strands of hair had turned completely white, and the cut on her finger had reopened. I showed her Adrian's notebook and the list of names. She did not seem surprised. The ritual, she explained, came from a handwritten book that belonged to her grandmother. As a child, Elena had lost her younger sister to an illness. Her grief-stricken mother became obsessed with stories about spirits who could be bound to the living through blood. Years later, when Elena began dating Adrian, the fear of losing someone returned. Adrian's life in the gang made that fear unbearable. She found a ritual called the Covenant of 3 Shadows. According to the book, 2 people could bind their lives together by mixing their blood and repeating a promise over dark water. If one died, their spirit would remain close to protect the survivor until the survivor's natural death. But every bond required a witness. The witness was not supposed to be human. "What does that mean?" I asked. "The 3rd shadow is invited to carry the promise between the living and the dead."
And what exactly did you invite? Elena looked toward the hole in the church roof. I don't know. The ritual should have been performed in complete isolation. No relative of either participant could see the blood or hear the words. But I had interrupted them. The dark water had moved toward me, marking me as the witness. From that moment, the covenant had 3 human names, but only 2 promised bodies. Something had to decide which of us belonged among the dead. Why didn't you tell us? We thought nothing happened. I showed her the missed call from Adrian's number the night before the party. Elena began trembling. That was the warning. What warning? That one of the promised lives had already been chosen. She admitted that she had tried to complete the ritual at the graduation party.
When she saw the dark sedan circling the house, she became convinced Adrian would be killed. She took the bowl, the thread, and the remaining ritual pages into an upstairs bathroom. Using blood she had secretly collected from Adrian, she attempted to redirect the covenant toward herself. Then the shooting began. Adrian was struck before she finished. What happened after he was shot? I asked. Elena, a male voice spoke behind us. Adrian stood in the church doorway. His white shirt was clean, his wounds were gone, and his skin had regained its color. For one impossible second, he looked alive. Elena took a step toward him. I grabbed her arm. Adrian smiled. Come home with me. Tears filled her eyes. Is it really you? He raised his injured hand. The red thread was tied around his finger. I kept my promise. Elena pulled away from me. Then I remembered something in the notebook. Adrian had drawn the covenant symbols several times. Beneath it, he had written, "The dead remember love. The thing between them remembers only hunger." I asked Adrian what song our mother used to sing when we were children. His smile remained, but his eyes became vacant. You know the song, I said. Sing it. His jaw opened. Instead of music, the sound of a ringing telephone emerged from his throat. Once, twice, 3 times. Elena screamed. The figure rushed toward us. We ran through a side door and crossed the flooded churchyard. Behind us, Adrian called our names in 100 overlapping voices, my father's, my mother's, Elena's, and finally my own. We did not stop until we reached the main road. When we looked back, the church entrance was empty. Adrian's funeral took place 4 days later. The morticians concealed most of his wounds, but they could not remove the darkness beneath his nail beds. My mother placed a photograph of our family beside his head. My father stood near the wall, refusing to cry where anyone could see him. Elena remained beside the coffin for hours. She pressed her forehead against Adrian's chest and whispered apologies. After midnight, my mother found her asleep in that position. When Elena lifted her head, a single drop of blood rested in the center of her forehead. There was no wound. The blood had come from inside the sealed coffin. Over the following weeks, Elena's health deteriorated. She stopped eating. Her hair fell out in handfuls, and thin red lines appeared around her wrists and throat, as though invisible threads were tightening beneath her skin. Every night at 12:23, she saw Adrian outside her bedroom window. Sometimes he looked normal. Sometimes he appeared exactly as he had in the alley. He never knocked. He only raised his phone and waited. Elena's family burned herbs, recited prayers, and invited spiritual healers into the house. Nothing helped. Mirrors cracked without being touched, bowls filled with dark water overnight. Her phone rang even after the service provider disconnected it. 3 weeks after the funeral, Elena called me and said she had found the final page of the ritual. I hurried to her house. She was lying on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by photographs. The walls were covered with 3 connected circles drawn in blood. She handed me the missing page. The translation differed from what she had originally believed. The covenant did not allow a spirit to remain and protect the living. It created a path. One person died to open it. One living person was taken across it, and the witness became a doorway through which the entity could enter the world. Adrian was the first. Elena was meant to be the second. I was the door. I asked how we could stop it. "There's only one way," she whispered. "The witness must willingly send the first spirit away before the second life is taken." "Then tell me how." Her eyes shifted toward the corner behind me. Adrian was standing there. This time, I knew it was truly him. He looked exhausted and frightened. His wounds were visible, but there was warmth in his expression. He raised one finger to his lips and pointed toward the ceiling. Something crawled above us, beneath the plaster. Its limbs pressed downward, leaving long impressions that moved from one side of the room to the other. Adrian whispered, "It followed your car home. Now it lives beneath your house." The ceiling split open. A length of wet black fabric dropped through the crack and wrapped around Elena's throat. Before I could reach her, the lights went out. Her scream ended with the sound of a telephone ringing beneath the floor. I reached through the darkness and caught Elena's hand. Something pulled her toward the ceiling with enough force to lift her from the floor. Her fingernails cut into my wrist as I wrapped both arms around her waist. The phone continued ringing beneath us. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, the black fabric tightened around Elena's throat. I pulled until my shoulders burned. For one terrible moment, I felt something on the other end pulling back, not from above, but from somewhere impossibly deep beneath the house. Then Adrian appeared behind Elena. His arms passed through her body like smoke. He seized the black veil and tore it away from her neck. A sound of breaking glass filled the room. The pressure vanished. Elena and I fell to the floor as the lights flickered back on. The ceiling was intact. There was no crack in the plaster and no fabric around her throat. Adrian was gone, but bruises shaped like a noose had appeared around Elena's neck. She had only short time left. The missing page described how to close the path. The witness had to return to the place where the covenant began, destroy the blood-bound objects, and release the first spirit before the exact hour of death. If we failed, the entity would take Elena. After that, it would remain attached to me and use my voice to enter every home that welcomed me. The ritual had begun in our basement. Adrian had died at 12:08 a.m. We had less than 2 hours. When I returned home with Elena, every window was dark. My parents and sisters were staying with relatives because none of them could bear sleeping near Adrian's empty room. The front door stood open. I was certain I had locked it. Inside, the house smelled of damp earth. Dark water covered the hallway floor, yet the carpet did not feel wet beneath my shoes. The basement door waited at the end of the corridor. 3 red threads had been tied around its handle. Elena stopped several feet away. "It knows why we're here."
I unlocked Adrian's metal box. We gathered the photographs, his notebook, the ritual page, and the remaining thread. Elena carried the brass bowl. The moment I touched the basement door, every telephone in the house began ringing. The landline in the kitchen, my father's old phone in a drawer, Adrian's phone inside his bedroom, even the disconnected receiver mounted near the basement stairs. All of them displayed my name. We descended without answering. The basement was larger than I remembered. The concrete walls seemed to stretch beyond the foundation, disappearing into darkness. Rows of wet footprints circled the place where Adrian and Elena had performed their ritual. Each print resembled a bare human foot, but the toes pointed backward. We arranged the blood-bound objects in the center of the three-circle symbol. Elena poured clean water into the brass bowl while I read the final instructions. A voice called from the stairs. "Daniel?" My mother stood in the doorway. She wore her nightgown, and tears covered her face. "Why did you leave me alone?" I knew my mother was miles away, but the imitation was perfect. Even the slight tremor in her English sounded real. Elena struck a match and lit the first photograph. The figure at the top of the stairs smiled. Its mouth widened beyond the limits of my mother's face. The lights went out. When they returned, my father stood in her place, then one of my younger sisters, then Adrian. With every transformation, the figure moved one step lower. We continued burning the photographs. The water inside the bowl turned red. The creature assumed Adrian's appearance and stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked healthy, just as he had on graduation night. "You don't have to send me away," it said. "I came home because you needed me." I wanted to believe it. Since childhood, Adrian had protected me from everything. Without him, I was frightened of the neighborhood, the gang, my father's disappointment, and even my own future. The creature knew this. It wore my brother's face because it understood that grief was stronger than reason.
"You said you couldn't be strong without me," it continued. Elena began reciting the words from the page. The false Adrian screamed. Its body stretched upward. The skin peeled away from its face, revealing wet black cloth where flesh should have been. Long arms unfolded from beneath its ribs and scraped across the concrete. The basement walls disappeared. Beyond them was an endless field of darkness filled with ringing phones. Thousands of pale figures stood in the distance, each holding a receiver against one ear. The entity rushed toward Elena. I stepped into the center circle. Immediately the thing stopped. Its veiled face turned toward me. I was the witness. I was the doorway it needed. I closed my eyes and called Adrian's name. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, someone took my hand. My brother stood beside me, covered in the wounds that had killed him. He was no longer trying to hide what had happened, yet he did not frighten me. He looked tired. "I'm sorry," I answered the call. I said. Adrian shook his head. "You answered because you thought I needed you. I still need you." "I know." Behind him, the veiled entity began crawling around the circle. Every time one of its hands touched the boundary, the concrete hissed. Adrian looked toward Elena. She was trying to save me. Elena sobbed. "I should have let you go. You loved me. That wasn't the mistake." He turned toward me again. The mistake was believing love means never saying goodbye. The clock on the basement wall moved to 12:07. Elena placed the final piece of red thread into the burning bowl. Blue flames climbed toward the ceiling. The entity shrieked and charged.
Adrian embraced me. For the first time since I found him in the alley, his body felt warm. "Take care of them," he whispered, "and learn who you are without me." The clock reached 12:08. I spoke the final words. "You are my brother. You are loved, but you do not belong here anymore." Adrian smiled. His body dissolved into thousands of points of golden light. The entity struck the circle at the same moment. Its veil opened, revealing a hollow filled with faces, people crying, begging, and calling the names of those they had lost. The light from Adrian surrounded it. Every telephone stopped ringing. The basement floor split along the lines of the symbol, and a freezing wind pulled the creature backward. It clawed at the concrete, changing from Adrian to my mother, then to Elena, and finally to me. My own face stared back at me from beneath the veil. "You opened the door," it said in my voice. "A door never forgets what passed through it." Then the darkness collapsed. I awoke on the basement floor at dawn. The symbol had been scorched from the concrete. The bowl had melted into a shapeless piece of brass, and every object connected to the ritual had turned to ash. Elena lay beside me. She was alive. The marks around her throat had disappeared. For the first time in weeks, color had returned to her face. We told our families only part of the truth. Elena eventually recovered, though a white streak remained in her hair. She moved away several months later and never performed another ritual. We did not become close. Perhaps being near each other reminded us too much of what our grief had invited into the world. I left the Harbor Kings and found work at the same repair shop where Adrian had planned to begin. It took years to rebuild my relationship with my parents, but we survived. The blood in my car vanished after that night. Adrian's phone never rang again. For almost 20 years, I believed the path had closed. Then, last winter, my father died quietly in his sleep. My mother and sister stayed at my house after the funeral. At 12:23 a.m., I awoke to the sound of a phone ringing in the kitchen. The caller ID displayed my father's name. I waited. 1 ring, 2, 3. It stopped. Tears filled my eyes. I whispered goodbye and began walking back toward my bedroom. Then the phone rang again. This time, the screen displayed my own name. From the dark hallway behind me came the sound of wet fabric dragging across the floor. A voice identical to mine whispered, "You were warned, Daniel." I did not turn around. The phone rang for the 4th time, and somewhere beneath my house, my dead brother began screaming not to answer.